Hi guys, today I'm back with a new video. The bloodiest conflict of the 21st century will start with a few dozen street cleaners, so go ahead and spray disinfectant on the sidewalks and nearby bushes. Do the most popular and important jobs and cultural places, so how many people are out? Early this morning and the sun is just starting to rise, but within 2 hours the capital of South Korea, with almost 10 million people and another 1 million tourists, will die by 500,000 by noon. Filled with backpacks and sprayers full of various chemical and biological agents months ago, mostly ignored by the authorities, the sprayers have contaminated several square kilometers of one of Asia's most important cities, and the highly contagious agents have reached millions of people. Within hours, faster-acting chemical agents are lethal nerve agents that target the brain's ability to send signals to various organs in the body. Hundreds of thousands of people are paralyzed and unable to breathe as they slowly choke off IL services immediately under are affected. Too late to save more victims of the biological agents that North Korean sleeper agents have spread around the world, so it takes longer to take their toll. The day the death toll will reach millions attack on the soul throughout major South Korean cities, especially Busan, a strategically important city for US defense, from South Korean agents trying to infect us and South Korean bases, but they have environmental systems that alert immediately. Officials for the attack is not enough to stop all casualties, but it severely limits the effects of the attack until it is clear that North Korea has struck the first blow, delivered the terrible second blow. In the South Korean capital, from behind the demilitarized zone, more than 1,000 projectile rockets joined them, creating a real rain of steel that rains down on the densely populated city every minute, and a staggering 10,000 powerful explosive shells pour into the city. The casualties are immediate. And there are so many, with close to 1 million people losing their lives in the first hour of the attack. But not all of those are ordinary receiving bullets. Smallpox and other biological agents are fired by hundreds of people at other South Korean cities and military bases. US bases, Asan and Konan, are directly attacked by chemical and biological weapons. But we made Patriot missile batteries succeed in killing many of the old generation destroyed. The missiles targeting those very important bases managed to get through them, but the damage is limited by the fact that American forces are vaccinated against anthrax and other biological agents, but South Korean forces are not, and attacks against the South Korean military is much more. Our deadly and South Korean warplanes are trying to get airborne, but North Korean special forces have launched bold attacks against most of the main airfields in Osan and Kunan. North Korean Special Forces soldiers carried out suicide attacks against US aircraft stationed there, managed a strong defense, but the raids still managed to destroy or damage many valuable American aircraft and, more importantly, significantly slowed air operations with aircraft in the air within minutes of the shelling of Seoul. Although efforts to find North Korea's deadliest weapons are ongoing, American and South Korean warplanes scream across the border, culminating in American and South Korean F-15s and F-16s clashing with waves of aging North Korean MiGs. Turkey fires at US and South Korean air forces, but the sheer number of defenders slows them down from their ultimate goal of destroying North Korea's nuclear weapons from Japan and operational bases in South Korea. North Korea's nuclear sites can be used before the weapons stored there, but they are not the only sites trying to reach North Korea's nuclear weapons. Forces stationed near their border with the North during hostilities, Chinese special forces board helicopters and fly at full speed toward their former ally. The instructions are simple and clear. Seize North Korea's nuclear weapons before they can be used, and kill anyone who stands in them. But whether that includes US Special Forces trying to do the same, no one knows. But what is clear is that with most of North Korea's nuclear sites within 60 miles of its border with China, the Chinese are likely to go first. They will get there, but these efforts are important in this case. The world holds its breath the moment a dozen long-range ballistic missiles lift off from launch pads in the mountainous north, as the rockets streak skyward, breaking through the atmosphere when it was thought Kim Jong-un would only use nuclear weapons as a last resort, but it has recently become clear that he was willing to use them in the early stages of the conflict. Air bases in Yusan and Kunang and the port city of Busan and several other South Korean cities will be targeted by a final missile directly at the US base in Guam. Despite having the capability to strike the US mainland, Kim Jong-un has decided not to say. The message to the US president is that he is willing to trade Los Angeles for Seoul by defending South Korea in this war, support that works in tandem. The South's missile defenses managed to stop 8 of the 4 missiles that hit them. With strong missile defenses on the island, however, the message is clear that Kim is willing to use nuclear weapons against distant US targets, to include the homeland. The loss of Yusan would be particularly damaging to US plans to defend the South, the port city being the only significant port it has. The US could deploy the large number of troops and war material needed to defeat the North, while the US has 30,000 troops in South Korea, estimated to be at least 200,000 to end the threat of the Kim regime once and for all. It needs power. Even as North Korean nuclear missiles are bearing down on the South, the air war against North Korea has destroyed much of its nuclear infrastructure and command and control nodes, despite the fact that the complete destruction of North Korea's nuclear capabilities would require a ground invasion with conventional forces, even with special operations. Arriving in the north within hours of the start of the fighting in earnest, these American soldiers encountered strong resistance from the North Korean defenders, and at some points came into contact with Chinese special forces, who defeated them there. Washington is fine with Beijing controlling the North. Korea's nuclear weapons thus avoid conflict between the two sides, but North Korea has prepared to defend its nuclear weapons against China and the United States, and not all efforts to seize its nuclear sites have been directed toward that end. American and Chinese units are completely destroyed. After an intense barrage of chemical and nuclear biological attacks against military installations and civilian targets alike, key locations dominated by North Korean defenders are struggling to meet the sortie rates required to check North Korean advances across the DMZ. Long-range attack capability is severely limited, and instead the Japanese Air Force aids in establishing air superiority and providing close air support for ground units engaged in heavy fighting by the North's forces, like a colossal man across the minefields and trenches of the DMZ. The casualty wave has been absolutely staggering, but with over 1 million people to throw at the South, the losses have been easily absorbed by North Korea's gigantic military. North Korean artillery suffered significant losses during the barrage of counter-battery fire and airstrikes, but the large number of guns employed by the North still gave it the firepower to inflict casualties on the southern defenders along the line. Beat South Line units. Unbelievable. Despite having superior equipment, training, and firepower, the much smaller Southern Army is steadily pushed back towards Seoul by the end of the first day of battle, night slowing the northern advance because many of its soldiers and vehicles lack night vision equipment or are thermal imaging. An opportunity for the South to strike back, and we and the South Korean attack helicopters and armored units launch a brutal counterattack against the northern forces. The US operates only 50 tanks in South Korea at any one time, but the big Abrams can easily handle them. And any Cold War era tanks the North has to offer, alongside South Korea's K-2 tanks, despite being vastly outnumbered. The North has been able to inflict a lot of damage on American and South Korean armored units. The bombing of North Korea has been non-stop since the beginning of the conflict. In the South, but flying from bases in Japan and Guam, their flight rates are very low. Additional B-52s and B-1s are being ramped up from the main US and European scene, but it will likely be several days before the B-2 stealth bombers are operational, however they have flown. From the US mainland overnight, refueled by aerial tankers, they cross North Korea's radar and track to launch surgical strikes against North Korean political and military targets equipped with massive, ground-penetrated Basta trenches. Decapitation of the North Korean government has failed in a swift attack. Kim Jong-un has survived the attack, and detailed information about the exact whereabouts of the North Korean leader is known. Although the B-2s are not armed with nuclear weapons, it seems, despite the threat to Guam, and successful. Attacks on US air bases in South Korean cities, the United States is unwilling to increase the nuclear ladder with the help of the US Air Force. South forces are able to stop the North Korean advance, which is right next to Seoul, the once vibrant capital. Now that's a post. An apocalyptic wasteland, with millions dead in the streets, and most of its infrastructure completely destroyed by bombings on a scale never seen in human history. Millions more have survived and are now in dire need of food, water, and medical care. But the North is interested not to meet the needs of a captive civilian population, but rather to prevent the spread of the diseases that themselves infected the city, with a brutal quarantine imposed on every report of a city and every offender. They were immediately shot on the spot, and their bodies were burned. The international community is demanding that the North Korean government allow humanitarian flights into the city to treat survivors and evacuate the population. But with China, now the Kim regime's mortal enemy, there is no country with the logistical capability. Carrying out such a massive operation when the North is not at war with, or does not trust the sole survivors, has now become a bargaining chip for the North, which calls for reunification with the South, but on its own terms. The situation is difficult for the democratic South. At least they say that while his forces have controlled the advance of the North into their country with the support of a huge amount of air and naval forces of the United States, but they cannot push them back from the border. The plan was always that the South would act as a deterrent against the Army should act. It is far enough north for the US to send combat troops into the country, but with port facilities at Busan destroyed and other ports contaminated by biological or chemical attacks, the evacuation of large numbers of US troops and equipment is proposed. Usually it takes 6 weeks. It will now take months to 4 months for the US to have enough troops in theater to evacuate the ghost survivors. Within 2 months, tens of thousands more were killed. Several million survivors, trapped by North Korean forces, would all be killed. As for the surviving government of South Korea, are they really willing to kill the 5 million survivors on the ground while they wait for their American allies? And are they, now that it is clear that the United States will not use its nuclear weapons? Write us in the comments. Thank you. To see more videos, be sure to subscribe to our channel. God bless you. Until the next video.